Hello, everybody. Welcome to this IUSSP debate. I'm Nico van Imwegen, the Secretary General of the IUSSP, the World Association of Population Experts, and I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of the Council of the IUSSP. Scientific debates have a bit of a tradition in the IUSSP, and we're very happy that today we see another episode in this tradition. I'm sure that we're all looking forward to the debate and to the panelists exchanging their views, and let's see if they can change or if they can convince us. We thank the IUSSP Scientific Panel on couples' reproductive health and fertility, and especially its chair, Stan Becker, for organizing this debate. And of course, all the great panelists that we have today and also the moderators for the debate. Thank you all. And of course, we would also like to thank Paul Monet of the IUSSP Secretariat, the man behind the screen who makes this all possible. This debate is a so-called countdown event. And these events count down to the main dish on the IUSSP agenda, which is the International Population Conference, which starts in only a few weeks. So be sure to join that conference. And even better, if you're not yet a member, be sure also to join IUSSP as a member. And always remember that student membership is free for the IUSSP. But for now, let's get started with the debate. And Stan, over to you.
Thank you. My video is off, Paul.
I think you can turn it on.
Okay, now I can. It said
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
because the host has stopped it.
Oh,
Sorry, folks. My name is Stan Becker, and I'm the chair of the panel on couples and reproductive health and fertility. Okay, here we are. So there I am. So we've had two scientific sessions, and this is our second debate. The first debate was, in patriarchal societies, family planning programs should use funds for programs to empower women instead of programs to involve men. That was a lively debate, and recordings of one of the scientific sessions and that last debate are on the IUSSP website. Our debate teams today each have two colleagues. For the yes team, there's Suzana Cavenaghi, sorry for the pronunciation, who's an independent researcher and retired from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. And Santhya Adedini from the Federal University of Ekiti, at the University of, and also at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. That's the yes team. For the no team, we have Francis Dodoo, who is at the African Institute for Development Policy, and we have K.G. Santhya, who is at the Population Council in India. In addition, Ambrose Akinlo of Obafemi Awolowo University and the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston and also a member of the panel. He will facilitate the meeting. And Dana Sarnak, who is a doctoral student at Johns Hopkins, will assist with a Q&A, will assist Ambrose. And Neetu John of Columbia University in New York will provide a synthesis at the end of the debate. So without further ado, I turn things over to Ambrose. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. Welcome again, everyone. Let me remind everybody that you should use the question and answer tab to see all the questions that have already been posted. So if there's any question that you like there, you can thumbs up on that question. That moves the question up the ladder so that we don't repeat those questions. And you can also post new questions onto that panel. So type your question and identify the team that you want to answer the question, whether it is the yes team or the no team. And if you want to ask your question or comment orally, you can raise your hand using the button, the raise hand button in the Zoom panel. Next page. So for this debate, the main speakers will be given 8 minutes, and the supporting speakers will have 3 minutes. I will now flip a coin to determine who will decide who goes first. So whoever wins the toss will decide who will be the first to speak. If it is head, the yes team will decide. And if it is tail, the no team will decide who will go first for this debate. So let me show the coin, and then I will go ahead and flip the coin.
Are you sharing?
Yes. Are you seeing it?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Let me try again. Are we there now?
Coming up, yep.
Okay. So I'll go ahead now and flip the coin. It's heads. So over to the yes team to decide who goes first.
Well, I can be the speaker here. Santhya and I have decided that the no team can take the floor first. So please go ahead, and then we go later.
All right, then the no team will go first. Over to you. I can't hear you. No team?
I think Santhya will go first.
You are muted.
I have unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you now.
Okay, and I am trying to share my screen.
All right.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh yeah. What about now?
No, we are not seeing it yet.
It's a long journey from India, so we wait.
Otherwise, Francis, would you share the screen if I'm having trouble?
Sure, I can try to do that.
Sure.
All right, so there we go.
Yeah.
Is that working?
Yes, I can see. I guess everybody can. Would you
Yeah,
like
we can see the slides. You can maximize the slides, and I will start the timer. All right, let's go.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I know it may appear like a more controversial stand to take up, but I'm happy to argue that we cannot consider a pregnancy unwanted just because the wife wants no more births. I say so from a reproductive rights perspective, from gender perspective, and from a measurement perspective. Can you go to the next slide, please? So it's true that women are more directly affected than men by decisions related to reproductive health for biological and social reasons. Reproductive rights are critical for women because they affect their mental and physical integrity, their health, their ability to enter and end relationships, their ability to achieve their educational and career aspirations, and so on. But let us not forget that reproductive rights are human rights. And the basic principles of human rights, namely universality, inalienability, equality, and non-discrimination, warrant that programs must recognize men's reproductive rights simply because of human being. And our measures of unintended pregnancy or unwanted pregnancy cannot ignore men's perspectives because of that. Next slide, please. And my second argument comes from a gender perspective. I know there are many people who believe that involving men and factoring their perspectives in reproductive health may limit women's control over reproductive decisions and may perpetuate the stereotypical gender roles that place women in a subordinate position. Many will argue it is women's body, and so her preferences should be, counted above her husband's preferences, and not considering a pregnancy unwanted when the wife do not want any more children would amount to denying her reproductive right to freely determine whether and when she should have children. But the question that I would like to pose is that, are the women in a subordinate position in the reproductive sphere? We see from several countries that the majority of women reporting that the decision to use contraception or not to use contraceptions are typically made jointly by husband and wife or by women mainly. So if joint decision making is the norm, can we justify labeling a pregnancy unwanted simply based on the preferences of the wife, for that matter, or based on husband's preference only? I don't think so, and I'm sure you would agree with me. Next slide, please. And one question that I want to pose is, what do we want women and men in a marital relationship to aspire for? Individual autonomy or cooperative action in which their relationship is produced, maintained, repaired, and transformed? Passive decision making or open communication between partners, flexibility, and empathic role reversal in decision making? I'm sure you would agree that we should promote the latter. And there is ample evidence that joint decision making and concordance are important antecedents for positive health practices. In several countries, as you can see from this slide, contraceptive use is more likely when both husband and wife wants no more births. And when their views diverge, we see that the proportion who use contraception do not differ so much. So shouldn't we be then considering both husbands and wives' perspectives while measuring concepts such as wanted or unwanted fertility and unmet need? Next slide, please. And my final argument against considering a pregnancy unwanted just based on women's perspective is that it's related to the measurement of this concept per se. In a review article by John Sentinel and others, they have reported that the current measures of unintended pregnancy is reasonable, reliable, and predictive at the population level, but the measures are not designed to be used at individual level. And I share some findings from a longitudinal study in India among married young women, a very recent study. And you see that women's fertility intentions are fluid and they don't necessarily predict interim childbearing or contraceptive use. If this measure is not designed to be used at an individual level, should it be considered as an indicator of women's reproductive autonomy? Next slide. So I would like to conclude by saying that we should respect husbands' reproductive rights simply because of human beings. And programs and research that focus on women and ignore men's reproductive roles, they are simply reinforcing the stereotypical differences between male and female sexuality, and they tend to erode men's responsible participation in reproductive health. And measures that only focuses on women's perspective presents only one side of this picture. We need measures that capture women's ability to negotiate freely, whether to engage in sex, her ability to negotiate the pregnancy that she wants, and her ability to choose the method that would help her to achieve her reproductive goals, and measures that capture her and her husband's ability to resolve conflicts, discordance amicably. And this requires programs. And there could be many ways of promoting this shared cooperative decision-making and concurrence and shared concepts of fertility intentions. And one such program that we should focus on is comprehensive sexuality education, which should start early, which would help boys and girls, men and women, to respect, realize their own reproductive rights, as well as respect reproductive rights of their partners. And such programs should be complemented by programs that promote husband-wife cooperative relationships and open communication, as well as programs that focus on people who influences their lives. And let me stop by repeating a statement from a married woman from Nepal who said, "Neither I nor he can do it alone. And it's not good to be satisfied alone." I'm sure you would agree with her. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. We have had the lead speaker for the team that's starting first. So I will turn over to the other side. I don't know who goes first there.
I'll go first. So
oh, okay.
I'm sharing
we'll
my
ask
screen.
Suzana to present for 8 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much to the organizers for this opportunity and the IUSSP for promoting this space for discussion. Since I'm going first and we have short time, we have decided in our team that my colleague Sandy will take a more macro approach and I'll take a more micro approach for this, so the individual approach. First of all, I must say that these debates are very controversial sometimes, and Nico have said some things in the beginning. However, I believe this is an excellent opportunity to move forward on dialogues of controversial issues, since we have to think about arguments and counter-arguments, and we have to put ourselves in each other's shoes, and at the end, we have to make a decision. But I say, guess what? We are always making decisions. We are mostly binaries, are yes and no in life. So what is at stake here? When I first read the question, I was struck by the word necessarily, what that means necessarily. So what angle I should take? And the question for me has two angles here. One angle is but for the necessarily word, her own desire now and versus her desire later. And for me, this would take the partner out of the picture. And this is something that I didn't want, and I think it's not worth it. But time is important, an important methodological issue, but it's not the angle for me here, because this is a 3-decade old, I think, debate about the timing. And here we are taking an issue that is a prospective measurement, not a retrospective measurement that has those post-rationalization issues involved. So here, this would be for me another debate. The second part of the question, if it is necessarily the timing issue, is an later debate. So what I would take here is the perspective or the angle of the wife's desires versus the husband's desires. And I think the same as my opponent have just taken both desires. So I feel fine having taken this angle of this question. So I say, yes, her next pregnancy will be unwanted if she says no more births. She doesn't want. So this is my take here. But first, we cannot deny, we still have problems. The concepts are very complex for the respondent to understand what is a planned, unplanned pregnancy, and intended, and wanted and unwanted. So here, I'll leave these concepts for later, but we need to keep this in mind, that the process of planning to have a baby or to have a birth involves a full process from a relationship. Santhya has said that it's within a relationship. It is a complex chain of a process that is very complex. And what I'm taking here is this last ring of this chain, is the desire for the pregnancy. And here, for me, the question is clear. If she said that she didn't want the pregnancy, it's something that she mean it, right? She doesn't want a pregnancy anymore. So this is the side I'm taking here from her decision. We also have to have in mind that only saying that I'm taking this angle and this kind of approach, that doesn't mean that this makes things more easily to understand. The word wanted and unwanted can mean a lot of different things in different places in the word. So what I'm doing here is using unwanted between connotation marks. Now, with this in mind, the wife's desire and the man's desire, or the husband's desire, why am I sure that the answer should be yes, her subsequent pregnancy will be unwanted? For me, pregnancy still happens in women's bodies, and also breastfeeding. The argument is as simple as that. So maybe if the next genetics change, I could change my opinion, but for now, her individual rights must be upfront. And I remember after a process within a relationship, as Santhya was saying, but after that relationship, after the decision, she's saying no, she doesn't want anymore. So I'm not arguing that the man does not have a say or a participation in the decision about reproductive life. On the contrary, he should be involved in equal rights relationship, but not from a patriarchal point of view. Involving men in reproductive life doesn't mean he will make the decisions. However, on this topic, her desire must come first, since reproductive rights are part of human rights, which are indivisible. And here, her individual rights must be met. And if you do not agree with me, I could say about breastfeeding, let's not forget not pregnancy only that is on her body, it's also breastfeeding we are talking about. And it is so important for the health of a child. Breastfeed sometimes it's, some say it's a journey with ups and downs. and it can and should be pleasant, but it can become a nightmare. And I couldn't imagine from a unwanted pregnancy or birth that what that would mean for a woman to be breastfeeding without much help from doctors or professionals on health, what that could mean for her. So saying again, not everything about pregnancy is a dream, as some may say. From the micro level approach, the individual's rights in reproductive rights, the wife's desire must be considered upfront, so her rights are met. So after all, she's carrying the pregnancy. So indeed, we say here, summarizing this two perspectives, these two reasons I'm taking, the individual rights and reproductive rights. We say always that in patriarchal societies, women are expected and pressured to have kids. And when she feels free of that, if she says, no, I don't want any more kids, I would say she mean it. And I emphasize it, she mean it and believe her. And more, since most contraceptives are female, she would only get pregnant upon a contraceptive failure or contraceptive access being denied to her. So what we would have, unmet need for contraception, and the ISPD implementation in the country would not be upfront, would not be as it should. But still, I cannot live here ignoring couples' point of view, as I have said. The desired family size is different between male and females, between men and women. So how can demographic surveys and analysis deal with the couple's desire and define wantedness of a birth from the point of view of a couple? And I say, maybe easy, maybe not, but ask them both and do the math. So how you do that? How you do the math? Dealing with both desire. We have, if she wants no more, and the husband does want, the pregnancy or the birth will be unwanted. If she wants more and he wants no more, it's also unwanted. And if it's finished?
Just a few seconds to round up.
Okay, so here is our question. So I would just finish saying here that even considering couples' desires, I reaffirm my initial statement. If the wife says she doesn't want no more births, but the husband does, yes, her subsequent pregnancy will be considered as unwanted. And finally, to rest my case, despite all complexity of reality and measurements issues, a birth should only be considered wanted if both partners say they desire the pregnancy. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that argument that you have presented. Before I call on the next speaker, let me also re-emphasize that questions can be posted on the Q&A using the button. And if there are questions that you like there, vote it up by hitting the thumbs up button. And of course, after the debate, do not be in a hurry to leave. We will give opportunity for a few people to also comment if they want to orally comment. And also, there is a poll at the end, just a reminder. So make sure you wait after all the speakers have spoken. We want to hear your views through those poll. Let me now call on the second panelist to go, and they will have 8 minutes, not 3, as I suggested earlier on. So you have 8 minutes to reinforce your position.
Thank you.
All right, thanks you, Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for clarifying that. I was wondering how I would be able to present in 3 minutes, so I really appreciate that. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be, and thank you for committing time to hear what I think is a really interesting debate. So my captain, Santhya, has already essentially presented the philosophical and empirical arguments that we wanted to make. Mine is to try to summarize our no argument, and I will try to do so now. Okay, so we start from the point that I believe Santhya started and ended on, that women's rights are fundamental. There is no question about that. And we essentially enter this debate asking whether we can necessarily, to borrow a word from the debate argument, we can necessarily say that the response to a survey question that is where we typically ask women whether they want another child is one that necessarily undermines women's rights.
Just a moment, Francis.
Yes, sir.
Can you make your presentation, can you put it in presenter mode?
I'm sorry. How do I do that? Let me stop sharing and then try this again.
Maybe it's display.
Yeah, but I needed to get it off the screen. So let's see.
I'll pause the time.
Display settings, presenter, no, display doesn't help.
No, just show it and then you right click and you can turn off the secondary view. Put it back on.
Okay.
Just share the screen. I'm not seeing your screen yet, Francis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Francis,
No, just share it and then you can right click. Just share it first the way it was, and then
Yeah,
I'll tell you.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to get back to that screen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Francis, I believe if you go to that, if you put in presentation mode, go to the 3 dots and say you have to hide on the presentation presenter, because it makes the notes for you. It's the thing for the new PowerPoint is the new one doesn't have. So
You can summarize verbally since you only had one slide, right?
Yeah, Santhya, are you able to help me with that?
Let me try, but
maybe Paul could share with his,
yeah, maybe that could be a good idea, I think. I am also.
it's just the last
Okay.
slide. Paul.
I didn't know it's just one slide because there was a note here.
I don't
asking
have the
that-
slide, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent you, Paul. Yeah.
Okay.
Gives us time to reflect on what we've heard.
There are 5 questions already. So
If you share with
On
me,
the
I can put it
Q&A.
up quickly. Oh, okay. Here we are.
Great. Okay, so next click, please. I won't say next slide since it's only one slide. Yeah, so essentially there were 4 points that I wanted to present in summary. The first one is that we have to ask questions about what the measurement actually implies. And like I said, a lot of these responses are responses to a survey question that asks women whether they want another child. Now, whether this actually measures women's preferences is something that we judge the validity of by looking at the robustness or the stability of women's reports about their preferences. And I think Santhya presented some evidence that confirms what we know in the literature about the instability of these preferences. So whether they actually then validly represent what we should be calling women's preferences is the first question that we wanted to raise. Similarly, the timing of the question in a survey relative to conception is something that we also probably need to ask questions about. I mean, if a survey asks a woman whether she wants another child 6 months before conception, one has to ask themselves whether women have the right to revise their preferences. And if they do, then we really can't be using the stated preference in the survey as the gauge of what they should be sort of conforming with. And therefore, the reason why we say that the pregnancy is necessarily unwanted. So the first issue is a measurement one. It's, and I saw a question in the chat, which basically suggested that perhaps we needed to revise our measure of preferences. The immediately preceding speaker, Suzana, essentially also asked that question. And it is the case that a few of us have actually sort of presented work that had joint preferences. And I think one thing that we will agree with is that that's a direction that we should all be going in, precisely because, as Santhya suggested, contraceptive use seems to be much higher when both partners agree that they want no more children, or that they both agree they want to space. So the first issue is the measurement one. The second one is about the point, next click, please. The second one is about union goals. If we should be thinking about the goals of the reproductive couple or the union, the reproductive union, then perhaps we should be looking at that last statement that Santhya ended on, which is this young woman from Nepal who basically says we shouldn't be trying to please our individual desires, and we should be trying to sort of profit our shared goals. So again, that's one where you would want to say, look, if women say they want no more children in a survey, and ultimately they have another child, it's potentially, it's possible, it's plausible even sometimes that perhaps if it's plausible that either they revise their goals, or the shared goal, the negotiation of the shared goal ended up in an inclination for her to have children, and it doesn't necessarily translate into a patriarchal decision. The third one sort of, next click please, the third one sort of hinges on a question that both preceding speakers have raised. And it's one about whether men should have any rights here also. And if you look at the case, particularly in sub-Saharan African societies where bride wealth payment is actually transacted, and if you lean on what anthropologists have told us about what bride wealth connotes, you will come to understand that this is a legal transaction that basically sort of gives men some authority over women's reproduction. Now, whether that in of itself is useful is a separate question. That's not what I hinge on here. The point I'm making here is that if there has been a legal transaction that then sort of vies off some of the reproductive obligation or responsibility to men, then you have to ask yourself the question about whether men's preferences also matter and whether men have rights in this decision. The fourth point that we wanted to make, next click, in summarizing what Santhya, our captain, presented, was this question about children's welfare. I think everywhere in the world, the literature is very clear that when you've got harmony of goals, harmony of attempts to achieve those goals between women and men, it bodes well for children. It bodes well for their health. It bodes well for their schooling. It bodes well for their mental health, and so on and so forth. And so in this case also, it requires us to also think about not just the woman, not just the man, but also the children who are involved who become the outcome measure of these wantedness and unwantedness measures. So In summary, what we wanted to present is that there's no debate about whether women's rights should be fundamental, precisely for the reasons that Suzana Cavenaghi gave. No debate about that. Women carry the children, women breastfeed the children after they're born. And indeed, the literature suggests that even in the most developed countries, women end up spending more time, more effort, more emotion on children than do men. So there is no question about that. This is, next clip, please. This is simply and narrowly a question about whether their preferences as stated in a survey necessarily connote what their true preferences are. And what we've tried to do is to present an argument that we have enough questions to ask about whether these are their true preferences, first of all. And second of all, even if they are women's true preferences that get stated in responses to these surveys, there's got to be a question about whether women also have the right to revise these preferences between the time that they state the preferences and the time of conception. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, this is really where we land on this issue, that we support fully the fundamental human rights of women in terms of them being able to do what they want to do with their bodies. I think in an article that I've written a while ago, I actually called it the most fundamental or the most basic of human rights, to be able to determine what you do with your own body. That said, in terms of this very clear question that we were asked to debate on, I think that you will agree that there's enough latitude to ask yourself whether revising preferences of a woman revising her preferences necessarily translates into an argument that her child is unwanted. So I will pause here. Hopefully I've ceded some time for my colleague on the other side, and we will go on. Thank you so much. And again, sorry about the mishap with the slides.
Thank you for that presentation, Francis. You are still within time, given the break. So we have heard from the two speakers from the no side, and we now want to hear from the second speaker from the yes side. I've been receiving your questions. We will post those questions to the respective teams after Sunday have made this presentation. Over to you, Sunday.
Thank you, Ambrose. I believe you can see my screen, the slides.
Yes.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are participating in this debate on a very important topic. So my job is very simple and straightforward. Building on the arguments raised by my colleagues, Suzana, within the next few minutes, just to further reinforce the argument, to convince the participants that if the wife says that she wants no more births, even though the husband does want another birth, subsequent pregnancy should be regarded as unwanted. And I'm going to take largely macro approach, as my colleague had already presented some micro perspective with respect to measurement, preferences, as well as all those issues. But just to further reinforce the issue around wantedness of a pregnancy, it's important to raise some pertinent questions. For example, with regard to wantedness of a pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy, or wanted birth, to who? Is it to the wife or to the husband? I think Francis alluded to that, as well as the other presenter, that it's important to respect the opinion of both husband and wife. So in terms of who has the right to decide whether the pregnancy is wanted or not. So they've both reinforced and established the fact that it is best approach the issue of wantedness of pregnancy to be addressed from couple's perspective, So a pregnancy should only be regarded as wanted if both husband and wife want another birth. And so if the wife therefore says that she wants no more birth, her decision should be respected, as has been highlighted in terms of sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as the burden of carrying a pregnancy. So as earlier established by my colleagues, who carries the pregnancy and who bears the burden of childbirth, who carries the burden of child rearing. Of course, we do know that women bear the disproportionate burden and the cost of child rearing, and therefore viewed very broadly, the issues of women's reproductive coercion, control over women's reproductive decision-making, lack of negotiation skills, fertility control by men. All of these are rooted in an entrenched system of gender inequality and inequitable social norms that predominantly play out in traditional patriarchal societies. And this has continued to drive the age-long desire for high fertility. So the assertion that household decision-making should solely rest with the husband, as it is believed in many traditional societies, is not only domineering, but is equally overbearing, authoritarian, bossy, dictatorial, and is a norm that drives gender inequality. So when you also look at the very important point, family planning programs, because women primarily bear the burden of pregnancy, most contraceptive methods are developed for individual women, looking at that perspective. Furthermore, most of the family planning programs, the various intervention programs, largely target women. So pregnancy or subsequent pregnancy that is not due to possibly contraceptive failure or lack of negotiation skills or sexual coercion or any other reasons whatsoever, after a woman had really decided that she wants no more birth, as my colleague earlier mentioned, that she really means it, that pregnancy should be regarded as unwanted. Also, when you consider some important international agenda, it is globally recognized that fulfilling the rights of women and girls is central to development, as the ICPD program of action indicates. Tenet of gender equality involves allowing women to have control of their reproductive choices, including the decision on how many children they want to, and when they want to have them. So the same thing also goes with the SDG Goal 5, achieving gender equality and empower women and girls. So it's important, therefore, to empower women to be able to take such decisions that affect their reproductive health, contraceptive use, negotiation for safe sex, fertility, interbirth interval, child spacing, as well as child limiting. The very critical other point that I would like to highlight in this debate has to do with the issue of fertility transition. Society's perceived primary role of childbearing for women is very central in fertility transition. A study by Handen in 2000 argued that for too long, in many high fertility countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, decision-making about fertility is often controlled by the husbands, who mostly do not experience the burden of high fertility. To corroborate that, another study by Mason and colleagues also argue that slow gender system revolution may partly explain the very reasons why Sub-Saharan Africa is about the last region to experience fertility transition. Also, Morgan and colleague in another study argue that in strong patriarchal societies, women's only avenue to status and security may be motherhood. To support that argument, a study was conducted in northern Nigeria by Izubara and Eze in 2010, and they found that women were giving birth to many children purposely to prevent their husbands from divorcing them or to inhibit the husband's tendency to engage in polygynous marriage. And so I therefore want to submit on this second point that until women are sufficiently empowered to be able to manage and have control of their fertility, Sub-Saharan Africa may not achieve the desired fertility decline. Another critical point before I conclude is with respect to the issue of demographic dividend and socioeconomic development. In this connection with respect to fertility transition, acceleration of fertility transition is a necessary condition for optimizing demographic dividend in Sub-Saharan Africa. As well, gender equality is very critical to optimizing and reaping demographic dividend. As the African Union Agenda 2063 stipulates, it seeks to achieve economic development, including the eradication of poverty, establishment of security and peace on the continent of Africa. So all these different international agenda and goals cannot be achieved without the optimal roles and involvement of women in socioeconomic activities. So as I conclude, if women are unable to exercise their reproductive control, there are grave consequences both at the macro and macro levels. I will continue to have the issue of high fertility with its different concomitants, such as high child mortality, high maternal mortality. Unsafe abortion will remain high. Women will not be able to participate optimally in the labor force. And of course, because of not having their contribution to the household income, household poverty will remain high. And socioeconomic development goals for the high fertility countries will be unattainable. So as I close, it makes sense, demographic sense, reproductive sense, and even economic sense to ensure that gender equality and is ensured and women are allowed to be able to exercise control over their fertility and other matters relating to their reproductive health. With that, I'd like to bring this presentation to a close. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunday, for that presentation. We've been having questions coming in for both teams, but let me just remind you that you have to vote. I'll take a stand. We want to have an exit vote. You voted at the beginning of the debate, and we want to have your views right now. So you can go and make the polls as soon as it pops up. Maybe
wait till after the 3-minute responses.
Oh, okay. All right. So I will pose the questions. First, we have
you have
yes.
3-minute response from each team, and then the questions and answers, and then the poll. Sorry.
Oh, so okay. All right then. Thank you. Okay, so the no team, we want you to go. Who is going to make a response to the positions of the yes team? 3 minutes.
Thank you. So just a point of clarification, is this 3 minutes for each of the no speakers or 3 minutes for both? Okay, so
no, just one speaker. Just one speaker.
Thank you. I will go ahead because my captain has asked me to take the lead on this, and so I will do so. Essentially, what we've heard is a debate between, on the one hand, I could tell from the presentations that these were two individuals. If you look, for example, at Sunday's presentation, he had his name and just his affiliation on it. So the audience has a very classic opportunity to vote against a man and a woman who have individual presentations and a joint presentation by another man and a woman who are voting no on this. So I want you to take that into account as you present yourselves to vote. There's some points that have been made that I'd like to push back a little on. The first one has to do with It's women who we should be looking at fully to make this decision because it is their bodies. It's something that we have all argued in the past. But when you start seeing women also, or women themselves also talk about how we really shouldn't be getting satisfaction alone, it behooves us to think about whether we really should be looking at shared or couple goals, as opposed to women's preferences in of themselves. I'd hate for us to get to the point where we're saying, because in many families, the breadwinner or the principal breadwinner is male, that should then entitle the man to make all decisions other than the fertility decision, all decisions that involve money. We really do not want to go there. And so we should always be thinking about how best we can foster shared or union or communal goals in these conversations that we have. The other point that I thought needed a bit of pushback to was this one about necessarily interpreting every male disagreement with females about preferences as necessarily being patriarchal. Dodoo, who shares a last name with me, senior lecturer at the University of Ghana, wrote a dissertation, and I've forgotten where she's published this in, but she wrote a dissertation that basically made the argument that African women have this very savvy way of making decisions and allowing men to think they have made the decision. Against that backdrop, you've got to be very careful about interpreting men's stated preferences as necessarily being something that is sort of patriarchally derived from the man or just the man alone. And I guess what I'm positing is that it's very plausible that when men say they want another child, even when a woman has said she doesn't want another child, it could still be reflective of a joint preference there. Then there's the issue about the stability of women's preferences, the presumption that if a woman makes a statement about her preferences, we should stick to that and she should not change it. I think that takes away a bit from women's rights, because in the same way that women's rights need to prevail in terms of their thinking and their decision-making, their preferences should also have the right to change their preferences. And I think that also is a necessary human right, which brings us to the question about whether her saying she doesn't want a child in a survey that precedes a conception and then her getting pregnant or having a child necessarily means that the child is unwanted. And we argue that because women have the right to change their preferences, you can't necessarily, and that's the key word in the debate, you can't necessarily say that a subsequent pregnancy or childbirth connotes unwantedness, because women do have the right to change their thinking. And these preferences have also been demonstrated to not necessarily be robust. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. So I will give a 3-minute opportunity to the yes team.
If Sunday allows me, I'll take 1.5 minutes. I just say, here's a team, Francis, and we say yes, and it's not, we are identifying ourselves as the universities or independent research, but this is why we have men and women both sides. So that's no problem. But we should have a gender identity maybe here. But since we are asking questions about husbands and wives' desire, here is a very, I would say, binary gender perspective. So here's a team, and we do agree in both micro and macro level. There is a question on the poll the Q&A, that I think it's important. What it is the objective, the purpose of this question? And for me, the panel tells me that the purpose here is looking at the desire of the husband and the wife as individuals or as couple, as I have presented. Then we should look at those and not the necessarily word, because if we go the necessarily, then it becomes a methodological issue. And if we talk about methodological issue, we have to discuss also about the word unintended or intendedness, what that means, and what is a planned pregnancy, fully planned pregnancy, and that's very hard. So we would have another debate for measurement issues on this question. Is a more than 30 years old debate. So we should do that, but not here. Here is the wife versus the husband. And you cannot deny, we are in a patriarchal society, very imbalanced society. I would just say to you about compares Latin America and Africa. In Latin America, we can say women rules within the reproductive life inside home and she decides. I'm not sure if that's the case of Africa, but I must say, we cannot say Africa as a whole because we have very different places in Africa where fertility already is going down. We should look at those, why fertility is so high in some places with unwanted or unplanned fertility and others are not. And I think here we have this gender imbalance that Sunday was talking about.
Okay, Sunday, you will have just about 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm fine with that. Yes. Further supporting what my colleague had mentioned, responding to the issues raised by the NODE group, the NODE team. And quickly want to touch on the last point raised by Francis, particularly with respect to the point of allowing the women to be able to change their decision, to be able to change their preferences. Reading through the questions posted to Q&A button, I saw one of the questions there that pregnancy decision is highly dynamic, and that's the point. It depends a whole lot on the circumstances that the woman or the husband or the wife or the couple put together have found themselves. So, and that could change at any point in time. But the point that we are advancing as the YES team is that whether the pregnancy is unwanted now, or wanted now, or the pregnancy is wanted later, the woman really means it. The wife means it, and that decision must be respected. Of course, the circumstance can change later and then change that decision. And the issue of timing is very critical here. So, and it's important to respect that, whether you allow, whether the woman does not want the pregnancy now, but wants it later, considering the fact that pregnancy decision is very dynamic, and that decision must be respected. And I'm conscious of time. Then the last point I also want to make is that both the NO team have also tried to establish that the cooperative action really matters. As the other colleague mentioned, that neither he, now quoting her now, neither he nor she can do it alone. And so that approach in terms of cooperative action really matters. And it's also what we're emphasizing, that if the husband does not want, it is still unwanted. If the wife does not want, it is still unwanted, and their decision must be respected. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that brief summary. So I think you can go ahead and vote now as soon as the polls pop up on your screens. Stan?
Wait till after the Q&A. People may change their minds with the Q&A.
Oh, okay. I thought their votes will be determined mainly by the speakers alone. All right, then. So let's hear our perspectives before you vote. So the first set of questions, I will pose this to the NO team. There's a question from Shreya Banerjee to Dr. Santhya. How do we reconcile between human rights of the man wanting the child and the inevitable violation of rights to body of the woman who doesn't want to bear the child? Let me add other questions too. Maybe you can note these questions so that I will not be asking questions every time, because they are related. So from Aditi Prasad to the no team, our goal is definitely joint decision making, but how real is it in the grassroots level? So in several countries, including India, the joint decision is usually husband's decision and wife agreeing in the fear of not offending her husband. In such case, how do you really navigate the ambiguous autonomy? So, and I will ask a third question. This is from Jason Bremer, and I think both teams have been indicated here. Research has shown that fertility intentions are fluid. And if you ask a woman before a pregnancy, during a pregnancy, and after a birth, whether the pregnancy or birth was wanted, you will get very different answers. Our survey measures don't capture this fluidity. How would this affect each side's argument? So take note of these questions. Let the no team go first.
Santhya, you're muted.
Santhya, your button is muted.
Bottom left of your
Unmute yourself.
screen. At the bottom left of your screen, there's a microphone. You can unmute.
Can any of the hosts unmute her?
No.
Okay.
Sure.
Why?
Okay.
All right.
I'll go. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Let me take that first two related question about joint decision making. Women may be reflecting on. In fact, the husband's decisions for fear of repercussions, and when women's decision goes against the husband's, and the violent and that kind of repercussions. My first response to that is that I think we have this notion of male-female relationship is like a zero-sum game, where women's gains are men's losses, and the other and men's gains are women's losses. I think it's time that we move away from that kind of a notion. And when you say that, okay, the joint decision making women is reflecting probably her husband's decisions, I disagree, because I looked at the different decision-making domains using this DHS data, and you see that there is a different patterns. For in the reproductive sphere, we see that in most countries, women responding about joint decision, but in non-reproductive spheres, like for example the household purchase and all, women could very frankly report that it's not her decision. So we cannot have a position that, okay, in the reproductive sphere, she is reflecting her husband's, and in the other spheres, she is reflecting, her own views, kind of. But coming to the fundamental question of, how do we respect men's rights when it is conflicting with women's rights of, protecting her reproductive thing? That's where the argument that we put. In a couple relationship, what do we want the couple to aspire for? Do we want to aspire for a joint decision that is negotiated, that is good for both the women and the men, and as well as for the children they beget? So what we are lacking is that we still feel that we should empower. I mean, I'm not denying that women should be empowered, but that empowerment can be inclusive of the perspective of the husband as well. So what we should aim for is that the couple empowerment, where both the couples respect each other's rights and arrive at a decision that reflects, that manifests, the preferences of both. Francis, would you like to add more to this?
I think, can I say something?
I think we should let the team respond.
Okay, can I go, Sunday? First, I would like to say, Santhya, you said women should be empowered, but, and I say we shouldn't have that but there. Women should be empowered, period. But then I would like to go back to the question about fluidity and stability is a measurement issue, or even couples decision, everything. We know how difficult it is for us demographers or non-demographers to ask about those issues, and that the intention of starting a family or enlarging the family is a very difficult one. It's a process, it's a large process. I have shown that long chain, and we are here only looking at the last noodle of that chain, the last part of that chain. But as demographers, we should deal with this instability of the question. And the answer that some have put with the prospective question is that you have to look at the near future. So define near, we're demographers, we could define there that we should look at the words, the terms, what that means for the woman. When we say wanted and unwanted fertility, and there is this paper by the London Measurement School, and they say wanted, they relate that to abortion. You don't want the child, it's not desiring at first place having the pregnancy. So what I say, we need to go and look at for better measurements, really to try to measure what it is a planned pregnancy, and that would involve men and women, a couple, or maybe an individual by itself, a preparedness for that. For women, for women's body, you need to be, you need to take iron, you need to take exams to carry a good pregnancy. So planning is something that we should be measured, not wanting or not wanting. But here we are saying, after this whole process, women and men went to that process with a gender biased or not system. But we are at the end, and she's saying, I want no more. Or he would say, I want no more. And for me, it's not from whom is we have to take the side. It's from the woman's side, it's from the man's side. Here is from the pregnant side. The pregnancy, the outcome was wanted or not. And as we are saying, if both are not, say they didn't want, the next one, we should count, and we have to look for proxies, not trying to put ever fluidity of the changes in behavior here. We have to measure, and measure why. And I would say the purpose here of measuring this is to meet the contraception, to meet ICPD rights, to meet the contraceptive right and access to contraceptive, the right time, the good contraception with no failure. So this is why we need to measure and measure really well if that pregnancy was from a failure in the contraceptive use, or a failure, or the contraceptive have been denied. So that's why we want those measurements of unwanted, unplanned, unintended. So this is our goal here. If that's the goal, we should look at the pregnancy. The pregnancy, if one of them didn't want for some reason, in some period, when we are asking the survey, then we should count that as unwanted and look for the policies to improve that and see where, when, and why women and men are saying that they don't want any more kids. We can look at the number of kids they have already. We can look at the nuptiality situation. We can look at the context and to understand this whole thing. But the goal here is to measure well the unintendedness of a pregnancy, because that comes from a unmet need for contraception.
All right, thank you for the response. We have other questions, and some of those questions you have touched, but I will still post this next set of questions. For the yes team, there's this question. Given that the site of gestation is the woman's body, do we still consider the man and woman as equal stakeholders in a scenario where the woman wants pregnancy and the man doesn't? Please note that. That question is from Banerjee to the yes team. And this is from Paula to the no team. In my opinion, my body, my rules summarizes the argument. It is the woman's decision whether she wants another pregnancy or not. Otherwise, one is saying that women without husbands are the only ones who can make decisions about reproduction on their own. Could the no team comment on that, please? And this question for both teams from David Okunlola. Don't you think that designating the pregnancy as wanted or not might need to reflect couples' decisions as regards pregnancy to include each partner's likely anti-pregnancy behavior, like sexual activity, contraceptive use, among others? And then a question for both teams, which has been touched a little. This is from Dr. Speza, who have worked extensively on couples' fertility. So, is this simply a measurement question? If so, often surveys do not have the men's responses, so we wouldn't know if it is intended based on the men's response. Then we might be stuck using her perception of his intention, which isn't necessarily better. So, what is the objective of this overall question? To know how much unintended pregnancy there is, or is it about understanding who might be at risk of an abortion? In this latter case, the woman's intention might be the determining factor in the end. And as a corollary to that too, let me also add this. Do women's responses always capture their husband's intention accurately? Both teams will also consider that in their response, because surveys have been capturing fertility intention of men mainly based on women's responses. But do women always get it right? The intention of their husbands. So, which team want to go first? I think the yes team should go first.
All right, if I think Suzana will allow me to quickly touch on some of these issues raised. First is to further strengthen the arguments with respect to the empowerment, that women should be empowered. And there's no doubt about that. That should not be something that we do negotiate. For example, the argument we presented earlier, that if women are not empowered, they will continue to make even some decisions that are not necessarily what they love to make. For example, the study conducted in the northern part of Nigeria, where women were having many children, mainly to prevent their husband from divorcing them or from involving in program and marriage. So if women are sufficiently empowered, it will enable them to take appropriate reproductive health decisions for their welfare and for the health of their children as well. Now, specifically on the issue of the question raised with respect to the husband's opinion, or whether it really matters, considering that the woman carried the pregnancy. I would say yes, the husband's opinion does matter. The decisions does matter. Like the work cited by my colleague, done by colleagues in the London School, it's a process. It's a issue of planned pregnancy is a process. And so the contribution of the husband and the contribution of the wife to that decision will really make a pregnancy well planned, because a lot of things are at stake. It's not just carrying the pregnancy to term for economic reasons, and even if the child is born, the welfare of the child, as the NO team has alluded to, really matters. So I would say that the husband's opinion or decision really matters in the process and should be part of it. And that's why we are advancing the position that if the wife does not want, or the husband does not want, can still be regarded as unwanted. But a very good process to planning, which is the planning for a particular pregnancy, which enables both of them to agree, considering their circumstances, makes them to regard a particular pregnancy as wanted. So the decision or opinion of both couple really matters. And I will just briefly touch on the measurement issue. I think perhaps that may be one of the future debates or topic for future debates that possibly IUSSP can organize, because we have not really traced the issue of measurement properly here. Issue of the wantedness, unintended pregnancy, and so on and so forth. So the issue of fluidity has been addressed by my colleague. So the measurement issue mostly captured from the perspective of a woman, and also possibly talking about the perception that their husband have. We have the view that not just the perspective of the wife should be considered, but even the perspective of the husband. So, and that would be the best approach, couples approach. So the wantedness of unintended pregnancy, so to speak. So using the approach, the couple approach, will possibly give some form of better measurement, and that's possibly what the IUSSP consider for future, as an important topic for future debates.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The NO team can take it up from here, but let me just remind participants that there will be a synthesis of the debate after we have heard from the NO team. And the poll is up already, so you can please go ahead after you have heard from the NO team. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for stressing that they should wait to hear from the NO team before they vote. So we've had a really sort of invigorating debate, and there were 2 points that I wanted to make. The first one has to do with, I think it was Paula who brought up the issue of my body, my rules. I was hoping that we would sort of try and veer away from that, because even though we all subscribe, and I think it's been clear that all 4 of us subscribe to the notion that this is a fundamental human right that should sort of be hinged on women, posture of that nature could easily lead to us considering similar kinds of issues in other settings. My money, my rules, and so on and so forth. And we don't really want to go there. The other point that I wanted to make was that we took the debate seriously. We took the debate seriously, and by that I mean, we looked at the verbiage, the wording of the debate. And what the debate was supposed to be about is, if she says no, she doesn't want another child, and she has another child, does that necessarily mean it was unwanted? And what we are saying is, no, it does not necessarily mean that. It doesn't mean we're saying that those children are necessarily wanted. What we are saying is it's not necessarily unwanted. And that's why measurement has become such a sort of a critical part of this debate today. But measurement and the points that we've made earlier were suggestive of the fact that perhaps even if a woman said so, she should be able to change her preferences. There's also the case that we demographers and people who do these surveys have sort of imposed on women. We've imposed on them this need for them to give us responses that are socially desirable. And so it may be the case, and it is frequently the case, I would argue, that a lot of women who say, no, I don't want any more children, are simply reflecting what they think we want to hear, or what a modern woman of today should be saying in a survey. So in that case, if she subsequently has a child, it's not necessarily that she has even changed her preferences. It's simply that she's actually effecting what her true preferences are. So we were simply making the argument that no, it doesn't necessarily mean that she doesn't, that the child is unwanted. And we are not at all suggesting that we are necessarily saying that the child was wanted. So that is where I will end. We've read a lot of patriarchy into the decision, and reading patriarchy into the decision, I think, is related to us thinking that this is necessarily her preference, and her preference didn't change. And consequently, if she had the fertility, then it went contrary to her preference. And we are saying it's possible for her preferences to change. It is okay for her preferences to change. And indeed, in this last case of social desirability, responses that are socially desirable, perhaps her preferences didn't change. She just didn't tell us what her true preferences were at the point of the survey. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have come to, a point where we will have to listen to a synthesis of the debate from a panelist. The votes are on. Keep voting as Neetu John synthesizes what we have learned so far. Thank you. Over to you, Neetu.
Thank you. Thank you. This has really been such an exciting, invigorating debate that I don't think I have the ability to really summarize it, because I think it was so comprehensive and there were such excellent points from both sides. And I'm really excited to see what the audience has to say in terms of where they stand and if they've changed their opinion from coming in and listening to the really fantastic debaters. So thank you very much to the amazing debaters. I guess the one thing to acknowledge is I think both the teams, the yes and the no side, had very nuanced points, and there was a lot of, and they both acknowledged that while they consider women's rights as fundamental, there was some there was an importance of a couple's approach, although they disagreed on where the emphasis was, and there was also acknowledgement of the measurement issues, the measurement challenges, which is a topic in itself. So just to summarize some of the key, quickly, very briefly, what the key points the no team made. The no team acknowledged that women's rights are really fundamental because women do have women bear most of the biosocial consequences of reproduction, but they argue that you cannot, just because of this, you can't really ignore men's rights because they're also humans, and so they have human rights. So that's one point. Then they also talk about the fact that by focusing on the woman, we're sort of also perpetuating gender inequalities. So that because we're just reinforcing what is already there and not giving the man any responsibility. Then the other point that they were trying to make is, what are we aspiring for in terms of relationships? Are we really looking for cooperation, or are we looking for, so that is another thing that they emphasize, that when you have a good relationship, you also have good outcomes for health and contraception. It's also good for children. So that's another thing to consider. Then they also brought up the issue of measurement. And one thing that they pointed out that was interesting is that just because we ask women their preferences, does it really mean that these are really their true preferences? Because preferences are not stable and they change. And the other thing they noted is that when you look at surveys on joint decision making in the reproductive arena, most women say that they make these decisions jointly with their spouse. So if that's the case, why are we not sort of giving that importance to the couple's perspective at this level? So that's the other thing that they emphasized. So when it comes to the yes team sort of emphasized that yes, reproduction is a process, and it's really important to think about the husband and the wife and their decision making. But when it comes to the final decision, they made the point that it's really important to think about the woman's right, because ultimately it is her body, it is her, she's the one who carries the pregnancy, she's the one who has to breastfeed. the cost that she has to bear is a lot higher than what the husband has to bear. Then the other points that were made is just from a macro perspective, if you really want to, create economic development, if you want fertility transition to happen, if you really want to attack patriarchy, it is really, really important that we emphasize women's empowerment. I think with that, I'm going to, since we are really short on time, I'm just going to sort of end there and over to Stan if he has something to add.
Thank you. I want to say 3 or 4 quick things. First is, I think Suzana had it right in one of her slides, that there's 4 groups really. Both want, both don't want, he wants and she doesn't, she wants and he doesn't. And that we need to take account of that. Second, Francis or someone mentioned unmet need, or it was in the chat, I guess. So I know Francis has written a paper on unmet need for men. I wrote a paper on unmet need for couples, and it's important to think of the couple in that regard. The third thing was this debate I gave a short course on couples and reproductive health in Ouagadougou, and we posed this question, and there were 3 women and 9 men, and all 9 men thought, no, you can't necessarily say it's unwanted. And the 3 women thought, yes, it is unwanted, because she said it's unwanted. And the men's argument was, well, she's carrying his baby. And so one has these differences. And the last thing I wanted to say is this has been a good debate, and we may have another one. We've got other topics that are of interest. For example, for a developed country, in unmarried couple are having sex and she tells him that she's on the pill, but she's not, and she gets pregnant. This is called entrapment. And should he be forced to pay child support for 18 years in that case? So that may be a debate we've got to decide as a panel which debate we'd like next, but that's one topic that's been raised for a possibility. So thank you all for coming, and I'll turn it back to Nico to say goodbye and until next time.
Thank you, Stan. Indeed, it was a very rich debate with very strong arguments, both from the yes and the no side, and also, which was great to see a lot of involvement from our attendants, and there were many attendants to this webinar. So a lot of food for thought and food for discussion. I think we shall continue it. The first occasion will be the International Population Conference in a few weeks, but I agree with Stan that there will be other occasions for IUSSP to continue this discussion. Thank you all, everybody on the podium, but also everybody attending this session, and looking forward to see you in a couple of weeks at the International Population Conference.
Forgot to say the poll results are there posted, I believe. Akin, do you want to say anything about those? I'm sorry, Ambrose?
Yes. Okay, so the poll results are here, and we have 52% saying yes, the same answer that they gave for the pre-debate poll, while 6 people changed from no to yes. That's 6% actually. And for no, 28% maintain their position as before the debate, while 13% were flipped from yes to no. So this is the outcome of the polling. Thank you.
Thank you all. Over and out, I guess.